This little book is about the adventures of Leroy and Myrtle on their exciting trip from Atlantic City to Washington to go to Obama's inaugural ball. Enjoy. It's called I Want to Go to an Inaugural Ball. Story and illustrations by Kiley. Dedicated to Leroy and Myrtle Llewellyn, my grandparents, with a special tribute to Barack Obama's grandmother, who also raised him, and to Mrs. Martin Luther King, with whom I held a candlelight vigil 40 years ago this year. That was last year. Chapter 1, Seagull Invasion. "Look at all the seagulls in this parking lot," Elizabeth said. "I thought I was going to feed the pigeons today, but I think there are more seagulls than pigeons. I wonder why so many of them are so far from home." "Maybe they came inland for some fast food," her friend Patty suggested with a grin. The seagulls heard the ladies' conversation. The gulls looked at each other. "Hey, Jake, why are you so far from the shore?" one of the seagulls said to another. "Well, it is true. I did come for those McDonald French fries. My arthritis is bothering me too. It's about 10 degrees warmer here with no biting wind. The buildings protect me from the elements." Suddenly, the seagulls began talking to each other. The noise they made was louder than the sounds coming from a middle school cafeteria at lunchtime. They were telling each other why they had flown south to the Washington, D.C. area. One of the best stories involved Leroy and Myrtle's flight from Atlantic City, New Jersey, to the nation's Capitol steps. "Look at that sign, Leroy." Myrtle pointed to a new boardwalk posting. It said, "Don't feed the seagulls." "I see it. Very discouraging," Leroy said with a sigh. "It's bad enough when the Atlantic City summer crowds dwindle to a winter trickle," she complained. "You know what, Myrtle? It looks like the people are starting to actually obey those signs. What's the world coming to?" "In my day, feeding the seagulls was one of the things the humans loved to do," Myrtle recalled. "I'm getting tired of this place," Leroy admitted. "I'm cold, Leroy, and tired. The wind and the sleet are not helping things this week." "I'll be right back," he said. Leroy flew over and grabbed part of an old newspaper. He tried to cover Myrtle with it. She smiled, and they snuggled down for the night on a lifeguard stand. Before dozing off, Myrtle read an article in the paper that Leroy had brought to cover her. It was about Barack Obama, and about his being elected as the 44th President of the United States of America, about celebrations, and about all the fancy balls being planned. Myrtle went to sleep, dreaming about dancing at one of Barack Obama's inaugural balls. Leroy looked over at Myrtle. He saw a big smile on her face. He had no idea just why she was smiling. Tomorrow he would learn. Tomorrow. Chapter 2, The Dream. The fog was lifting as the sun began to rise. Myrtle plucked an icicle from Leroy's beak. "Hey, watch it," Leroy growled as he tried to open his early morning eyes. "Why are you smiling wider than the horizon this morning?" he scowled. "I have an idea, Leroy." "Oh, no. How much is it going to cost me this time?" "Hush, Leroy. It will only take time, energy, and courage to make a change." "What is it? What do you want to do, Myrtle?" "I want to go to Washington, D.C. for the rest of the winter." "Washington, D.C.? Why?" "I want to dance at one of President Obama's inaugural balls." "I don't know my way to Washington, D.C. It's off my normal flight path," Leroy pointed out. "If I figure out how to get there, can we do it? Please, Leroy?" "It has to be a safe, rational plan. He barely whispered under his breath. We'll see, he said a bit louder. Myrtle was content to see it wasn't totally out of the question. Leroy was hungry now. Let's go over to Bally's casino front and see if we can get some donut crumbs from some of the bakery customers that come out of the Wild Wild West side, he suggested. They flew to a guardrail and watched with hungry eyes. A woman was opening a bag. She began throwing small pieces of donuts into the air. This was Leroy's favorite game. Myrtle loved to watch him swoop and glide and snatch them in his beak. He rarely missed and honked with pride as he brought her piece after piece of donut. After breakfast, they watched the people on the boardwalk. Myrtle was racking her plan for a rational plan. She had heard Leroy's comment. She watched a Greyhound bus as it unloaded a group of people at Bally's. She looked at the bus next to it. The bus sign spelled out Washington, D.C. That's it! That's it, Leroy! We can fly high above a Greyhound bus and follow it to Washington. No sweat, Leroy. We can do it. Yes, we can. It wasn't long after that when a stray, under-the-boardwalk cat tried to eat Leroy for breakfast. Leroy, look out! Myrtle screamed, just in time for him to leap into the air to safety. All the cat got for his sneaky lunge was a face full of sand. Let's get out of here and fly over near the arcade, Leroy said, while unruffling his feathers. Good idea. Since James, the skee-ball attendant, bought a German shepherd, none of the cats have dared go near the arcade, Myrtle agreed. They pecked at the boardwalk in front of the stores near the arcade, talking about Myrtle's idea of a trip to D.C. Well, Leroy started, I do like your idea about following a Greyhound bus. I know that they make rest stops. These stops usually have fast food or pizza places, so there would be plenty of food to pick through. Just then, Leroy found a strand of metallic red beads. Someone had tossed them to the ground. He managed to place them playfully around Myrtle's neck. Myrtle also found something interesting in the trash can. It was a long piece of silver tree garland. It was stuck in the wire mesh. She struggled to get it out. Then Myrtle put it around Leroy's neck like a fancy Hawaiian lei. Hey, look at us in those funhouse mirrors. We're all dressed up for a ball. Suddenly, a store owner, sweeping his storefront, came running at them with a broom. Get out of here! Shoo! Scram! Every day you make a mess. Every day I have to clean it up. Give me a break. Leroy and Myrtle looked at each other. Then Leroy said, Okay, we'll give you a break. We're going to Washington, D.C. I'm tired of the signs. I'm tired of the cold. I'm tired of the cats. And I'm tired of the workers, Leroy said with an attitude. That's right, Myrtle pitched in. It really is hard to get good workers these days. The trip was on. They made their plans, they told their friends, and set a time to leave. Chapter 3. Did you turn off the coffee pot? Did you lock the door? Did you give the mailman our temporary forwarding address? Leroy teased on the morning of their departure. Get serious, Leroy. I'm excited, but I'm a bit nervous too, Myrtle admitted. They flew over to Bally's about 11 a.m. on the Sunday after Christmas. They were depending on traffic jams here and there to get some rest along the way. Here it comes, Leroy said. The Washington, D.C. bus is coming out of the garage now. About 20 of their noisiest friends came to see them off. They waved and promised to send a postcard, airmail. One important thing was on their side. The wind would be at their back for the trip, and they were thankful for the chance to glide much of the way. Less than an hour later, Leroy said, Look at that bridge, Myrtle. When we cross it, we will be in Delaware." They were stuck in a long backup at the Delaware Memorial Bridge. "I'm a little tired, Leroy." "Well, my lady, let's just fly on down to the top of the Greyhound bus, take a few bites up there with us, and rest during the stop-and-go phase." "Sounds good to me." It took about an hour of inching along before they passed the toll booths into Delaware. They stood on top of the Greyhound bus, and as it was their custom each time they entered a brand new state, Leroy grabbed Myrtle's wing and said while jumping up and down, "One thing will never change. We have been to Delaware." They flew high above the bus again as the traffic began to move at a normal speed. Chapter 4. "I feel refreshed, Leroy." Myrtle started singing. "I want to fly like an eagle to the sea. I want to fly like an eagle. Let my spirit carry me." Leroy smiled as she sang oldies but goodies she had learned on the guardrails near Caesar's on the boardwalk. Although they had flown many miles and were quite tired by the time the bus made its rest stop, it had been a pleasant experience, an experience they would never forget. The Greyhound bus stopped at a travel plaza. Leroy and Myrtle flew down from the clouds to join the other D.C.-bound passengers. "Look," Leroy pointed. "A man just threw half of a Sbarro's pizza on the ground." "The bus driver was starting to pull away without him," Myrtle said. "When the box hit the ground, the lid flew open. Lucky us. Chow time." "I hope it has anchovies," Myrtle said. Leroy laughed. "You're the first one I ever heard say that." "Well, I am a seagull, you know." Chomp, chomp, chomp. "Well, that only took us 2 minutes to finish the pizza." "You have tomato sauce all over your beak." He put his head under her wing. "Is that better?" he asked. "Cut it out, Leroy." Myrtle was distracted for a moment. "What's on your mind, old gal?" "Look, inside that door. See that brochure about D.C. tourist attractions? I want it. I'm not sure where I want to go when we actually get there." "You want that brochure? You really want that brochure? Okay, I can get it for you. I'll just wait until somebody with a lot of luggage holds the door open long enough for me to grab it in my beak. I'll be out like a flash before they know what's happening," Leroy said in his superhero voice. "Okay, but be careful. Don't get your tail feathers stuck in the door." She had hardly finished that line when Leroy made his move. He flew into the open door, straight for the target, and reached his mark. There was a scream and a fuss. He had the brochure in his beak, but the woman closed the door and ran inside. Leroy was trapped. It was only for a moment. A bus driver opened the door to see why the lady had screamed. Leroy jumped out. He was all in one piece. Myrtle was delighted and proud of his heroics. They flew a little distance from the bus to save their necks. They still had 10 minutes until the rest stop was finished. Myrtle studied the brochure and Leroy took a little nap. A few minutes later, she shook Leroy a little. "Hey, the bus is moving in reverse. Time to—" Leroy cut her off. "I know. Time to fly like an eagle." Up they flew once again into the wild blue yonder. Now they were less than an hour away from Myrtle's dream. They made a few more quick stops to drop people off, and after Silver Spring, they knew D.C. was getting very, very close.